I never thought a $10 bet would unravel the version of myself I'd spent 6 years carefully building. It was the night of the Meridian Awards dinner, architecture's equivalent of the Oscars, except the food was better and the speeches were worse. Black tie, candlelight, a ballroom full of people who spoke in building heights and load-bearing metaphors. I was 29 years old and had been a junior associate at Alcott & Grayson Design for 14 months, which meant I was there to look presentable, not to talk to anyone important. That part I was handling beautifully. I'd found a corner near the bar that offered a clean sightline to the exit, and far enough from the main tables that no senior partner would accidentally make eye contact with me and feel obligated to include me in a conversation I wasn't equipped to have. I was working on my second sparkling water. I was completely invisible. I was thriving. Then Dev appeared beside me with a $10 bill folded between 2 fingers and a grin that meant trouble. Maren Alcott, he said, nodding toward table 7, has been sitting alone for 11 minutes. I looked. He was right. The firm's founding principal sat at the center of our reserved table, untouched champagne in front of her, watching the room with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. Everyone else from Alcott & Grayson had scattered to work the crowd. She had not scattered. She had simply remained, in the way that certain structures remain. Not because they're anchored to the ground, but because they have no reason to move. Ms. Alcott, the Meridian, people called her in interviews, though never to her face, because her work always found true north, but she herself was unreachable. I'd worked 14 months in the same building as her and had exchanged, at generous count, 30 words with her directly. She was the kind of presence that made junior associates find sudden urgent business in the opposite direction. "I'll give you $10 to go sit beside her," Dev said. "I don't need $10. I'll give you $10 and I'll cover your next 2 lunch orders." I looked at the 10. I looked at table 7. I thought about all the ways this could go wrong and counted at least 6 before I stopped, because the 7th was already walking me across the room before I'd decided to go. I pulled out the chair 2 seats down from her. Not immediately adjacent, I wasn't suicidal, set down my sparkling water and sat. She didn't look up. She was reading something on her phone with the focused stillness of someone who had long since mastered the art of being exactly as present as she chose to be, no more. I said nothing. I looked at the room. I waited for the sensation of having made a catastrophic mistake to peak and recede. After maybe 45 seconds, she said, without looking up, "You came from the bar corner." It wasn't a question. "I was counting exits," I said, professionally. A pause. She looked up. I had worked 14 months in this woman's firm, and this was the first time I had been close enough to see that her eyes were not the dark brown I'd always assumed from a distance, but a very deep gray, like architectural drawings on white paper. "There are 4, she said. "Main entrance, service corridor left of the stage, fire exit behind the dessert table, and the one staff are using near the kitchen. I counted them when I arrived." I had only found 3. "The kitchen exit is locked from inside after service starts," I said, which was either the right thing to say or the last thing I would ever say in professional company. She looked at me for a moment, set her phone face down on the table. "Lane Whitford." "Yes." "Urban Resilience Project, the transit hub schematics from last month." I tried not to look as surprised as I felt. "That's me." "You hid the mechanical systems inside the public art installation," she said. "Most people would have buried them in the basement and called it efficient." "Basements aren't interesting," I said, "and the installation needed a reason to exist that wasn't just decoration." She looked at me for another moment, and then she picked up her champagne for the first time. "I'm Maren," she said, as if we hadn't known each other's names across 14 months of shared air. "Do you want to find a quieter part of this room, Lane, or are you committed to the corner by the bar?" I was not, it turned out, committed to anything. We moved to the far edge of the venue near a row of tall windows overlooking the city skyline, downtown lit up and indifferent below us, the kind of view that made whatever was happening inside the ballroom feel correctly small. She stood with her champagne. I stood with my sparkling water. We looked at the lights. "Dev bet you," she said. The back of my neck warmed. He offered $10 and 2 lunch orders. That's $15 courage. $12 actually. I was already going to go. She turned to look at me. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, not in a way most people would have caught, but I was standing close enough to see the precise moment her posture changed from measured to something less performed. "Were you?" Everyone else was too busy networking to notice you'd been alone for 11 minutes. That seemed, I don't know, wrong. She was quiet for a moment. The city lights sat below us, patient. The board approved the Halcyon Tower Commission today, she said. Largest project this firm has ever taken on. The words landed with a weight she didn't try to disguise. That's extraordinary, I said. It is, she agreed. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something thin at the edges. It also comes with a lead client who I have a complicated history with, and no one in that room knows that yet except me. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I apologize. That was inappropriate for a firm event. It wasn't, I said. She looked at me, really looked, the way she'd looked at my transit hub schematic. And for one unguarded moment, I saw something I had never expected to see on the face of the woman whose work hung in the permanent collection of 2 architecture museums. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding everything up by herself for a very long time. Then her phone screen lit on the table behind her. She glanced at it. Every trace of that openness closed over, fast and total, like a blueprint rolled back into its case. "Excuse me," she said, and walked toward the far side of the room. I looked at the lit screen before it dimmed. The name there was Barrett. That name stayed with me the way a stress fracture stays in a wall. Invisible, structural, somewhere you know you shouldn't keep pressing. I didn't know who Barrett was. I had no particular reason to find out, but I kept thinking about the way every careful, composed thing in her face had simply switched off the moment she saw it, like a building losing power from the mains, immediate, complete. Not surprised, anticipated. Monday morning I was at my desk in the junior design studio by 7:45, which was 45 minutes earlier than usual, and which I was not prepared to examine too closely. I had a display model rendering open on my screen that I'd been staring at without seeing for approximately 20 minutes when I heard her footsteps in the corridor outside. Heeled, measured, completely even. The kind of walk that had its own weather pattern. 3 junior associates at nearby desks sat fractionally straighter without appearing to notice they'd done it. Ms. Alcott passed the glass partition of our studio without looking in. I exhaled. Dev dropped a coffee on my desk and raised both eyebrows. I shook my head. He went back to his desk. 4 days later, she appeared at the studio door herself. Not her assistant, not an email flagged urgent. Her at the door of the junior studio, which had never happened in the 14 months I'd been there. Lane, my office, 10 minutes. And she was gone. I counted 11 people watching me gather my portfolio. I carried it down the hall, feeling like a man walking towards something he had not yet decided whether he wanted. Her office was the northwest corner of the building. The best light, which everyone understood was not a coincidence. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, the city folded out in every direction below. A single drafting table beside the main desk, tilted at a working angle. And on the far left corner of the windowsill, a small clay model of a bridge. Simple, imprecise in the way handmade things are imprecise. Nothing like the precision of everything else in the room. She was at her desk with a set of drawings spread open in front of her. "The Halcyon Tower project," she said without preamble. "I've reviewed the initial concept proposals from the senior team. They're technically sound." She turned the drawings to face me. "But they don't answer the right question." I leaned in. The proposals were good, clean, intelligent, safe. What question are they not answering? "What this building is for," she said. "Not structurally why it should exist." I looked at the drawings. I thought about basements not being interesting. "What do you have from me?" "Nothing formally, but I reviewed your full portfolio when you joined the firm." She opened a second folder. Inside were photographs of work from my position before this one. A community library I'd designed before I'd learned to make things safe instead of meaningful. "This," she said, "answers the right question." I stared at my own old work. "Those were early instincts," I said, "unpolished." "Unpolished instincts are more valuable than refined indifference," she said flatly. "I want you on the Halcyon concept team, full involvement, starting now." She paused. "How do you take your coffee?" I blinked. "You'll be spending significant time in here going over the references with me. I want to know how you take your coffee." "Black," I said, "1 sugar." "Noted." She turned back to her drawings. "That's all for now." I was almost to the door when she said, without looking up, "The bridge on the windowsill. Don't ask about it, not yet." I didn't, but I thought about it for the rest of the day. The next 3 weeks built a world inside that corner office that had nothing to do with the rest of the building. I learned things about Maren that the industry profiles and the award citations and the very respectful feature in Architectural Digest had not thought to include. She snapped her sugar cube in half before dropping it into her espresso, always exactly half, not approximately, not by feel, but with the specific attention of someone who had decided this was the correct amount and saw no reason to renegotiate with herself daily. She kept a worn sketch pad in her center desk drawer, always open to the same spread, a bridge design in pencil and ink, intricate, unfinished. Not the clay model on the sill, something older, more urgent. I only saw it twice, when she forgot to close the drawer, and both times it was open to the same page. When she was thinking through a problem, she traced the edge of the nearest surface with one finger, desk, drawing table, window frame, slow, automatic, like she was reading something in the material itself. I started presenting ideas in ways that gave her surfaces she could trace while I was talking. I told myself this was functional. I stopped believing that around day 9. She was composed in meeting rooms and something close to alive in the late evenings, when the building emptied and the overhead lights on their automatic dim setting made the studio feel like the inside of a held breath. She argued about proportion with a fervor she never brought to client calls. She told me once, studying a section drawing at 11 p.m., that the reason most public buildings felt like waiting rooms was that architects designed for the moment of arrival and forgot about the experience of being inside time. Arrival is 20 seconds, she said. The building has to justify the next hour. I thought about that for days after. One evening I moved a structural element in our halcyon concept layout, and she stopped mid-sentence. "Move it back," she said. "If I move it back, the eastern atrium loses its sightline to the park." The structural logic requires. The structural logic can be solved 3 other ways. The sightline can't. I showed her the alternatives I'd already run. She was quiet for a long moment, moving through each one. Then she looked at me with an expression I had not yet learned to name, but was beginning to recognize as the one that preceded something rare. "You're right," she said, quietly, with the cadence of someone paying a real price for the admission and choosing to pay it anyway. "I know," I said, and something in the room shifted just slightly, like a key finding the right lock without turning it yet. That night, heading for the elevator, I passed the executive corridor and caught a fragment of her voice from behind a half-closed door, low and controlled, fraying at the edges in a way I had never heard from her. "Barrett, I told you I'd think about it." I kept walking. Barrett Voss arrived on a Tuesday. I knew it before anyone introduced him because I heard his laugh first, the kind designed to fill whatever room it enters, not because it's particularly joyful, but because it understands that presence is a form of occupation. He came through the main floor with the easy confidence of a man who had never once in his life walked into a room and wondered whether he belonged there. Mid-40s, perfectly fitted suit. Senior partners were already orienting in his direction like compass needles finding north. Dev leaned across the desk partition. Barrett Voss, lead client and primary investor on Halcyon, built half the mixed-use developments in the Pacific Northwest, connected everywhere. I said nothing. By Thursday, Barrett had made himself completely at home. He sat in on project reviews. He asked questions in the specific tone of someone who already knows the answer and is testing whether you do. He had a habit of placing one hand briefly on the shoulder of whoever he was speaking to, a small, practiced gesture that was less about warmth and more about the quiet establishment of where things stood. He watched Maren the way you watch something you once had and believe you still hold some claim to. I had no professional right to notice this as carefully as I did. I noticed it. Friday afternoon, Maren called me into her office. She was standing at the window when I arrived, arms crossed, looking at the city below. She didn't turn around when I came in. "He's asked me to dinner," she said. No context needed. "What did you say?" "That I'd consider it." She turned around then, and the expression on her face was one I had never seen there before. Not the cold, not the composed. Something underneath both of those, older, more honest, less willing to be covered up. Which means I've been considering it for 3 hours instead of working. "Do you want to go?" She looked at me for a long moment. I want to say no, there's a difference. I understood the distinction without her explaining it. He's the lead client. If you decline, it reads as personal. If you accept, it becomes personal again. Yes, something in her posture dropped slightly, not defeat. Recognition, you said it faster than I did. You've been carrying it longer. I held her gaze. You don't have to make the decision that looks most professional. You just have to make the one you can live with on the other side of this project. She looked at me for a long time without answering. How's the Eastern Atrium coming? She said finally. Which was her version of thank you. I was starting to know the difference. I overheard them 9 days later. I wasn't trying to. I was returning drawings to the print room when their voices carried from the conference alcove. Not loud, but pressurized, the specific acoustic of a serious argument being held in a controlled register. Barrett's voice first, smooth and practiced, with something less smooth running underneath it like rebar under concrete. You've been pulling away from the team, Maren. The investors are noticing. I'm noticing. I'm managing a complex project, that's my job. You're isolating, the way you always do when you're getting close to someone. A pause. He's a junior associate. Whatever you think is happening. Barrett, her voice flat, absolute, the single word landing with the weight of a final decision. I'm trying to protect you from yourself here. The development board won't be comfortable with optics that suggest the principal architect has a personal interest in a junior. Stop. Quieter than the word before it, which made it heavier. I need you to leave this conversation. Footsteps. Barrett emerged from the alcove, walked past me toward the elevators without acknowledgement, which told me he had known I was there the entire time. I stood in the print room doorway for a long moment. Then I walked to her office. The door was open. She was at the window, that window, the one that held the entire city, with both hands pressed flat against the glass and her back to the room. The clay bridge model on the sill caught the late afternoon light. The sketchpad in the drawer was probably open to the same page it was always open to. I knocked on the frame. I heard I said some of it, I'm sorry. She didn't answer immediately. Her hands stayed on the glass. Lane. She said my name like she was weighing it. You've been different this past week, more careful. There it was. I had not told her about the conversation I'd had with the firm's ethics officer 6 days earlier. A senior partner had apparently noted the frequency of my late evenings in her office and filed an informal concern about proximity between a principal and a junior associate. I had been advised, gently and firmly, to allow the natural conclusion of the project to reduce the contact. I had been trying to protect her position. I had been doing it badly, and she had noticed anyway, because of course she had. I told her the truth. The silence after was the longest of my professional life. She turned around slowly. Her face was not angry. It was something harder to look at, open in a way I'd only seen in small, carefully deniable increments across the past weeks, but now it was simply present. Unhidden, a reckoning she had no interest in closing. Sit down, she said. I sat. She remained standing and moved to the drafting table, arms crossed. Not in the closed-off way, but in the way of someone organizing her own thoughts and giving them room. I was 28, she said. Barrett and I co-founded a firm together. Not this one, the one before this. He had the capital and the client relationships. I had the design vision, and for 4 years it worked. Her voice was steady in the way of someone who has made full peace with the facts, but not entirely with what they cost. Then a major international practice approached him with a partnership offer. He took it. No conversation, no transition plan. Just gone. 1 week he was there, and the next his name was off the lease. She traced the edge of the drafting table with one finger, slow, automatic. I rebuilt. Took 3 years and a second mortgage and every professional contact I'd developed independently, which it turned out was enough. She stopped tracing. The reputation for coldness started there. I didn't construct it deliberately. I built systems and standards and a specific kind of professional distance because I had learned what happened when you trusted the wrong kind of certainty. I thought about her snapping that sugar cube in half every single morning with the focus of someone who had decided this was the correct amount and would not be talked out of it. And the bridge, I said carefully. She looked at the closed desk drawer, then at me. It was our first real commission. Before the collapse, I designed it. Barrett found an investor who wanted a simpler structure at half the cost, and that's the one that got built. She looked at the small clay model on the sill. I make a new model every few years. I'm not entirely sure why I keep doing it. The original project isn't coming back. Maybe it's not about the bridge, I said. She was quiet for a moment. No, she agreed, maybe it isn't. I leaned forward. What Barrett is doing right now, using his position on this project to apply personal pressure, framing himself as the only stable option available to you, that's not new behavior, is it? No, she said. It's exactly what he has always done. The difference is that I'm 15 years older, and I have a board who trusts my professional judgment, and I have. She stopped. What? A reason, she said, that I didn't have before, to make a different choice. The room was very quiet. The city outside sat in its late afternoon amber, going about its business, indifferent to everything happening on the 42nd floor. I stood up. We were closer than the careful weeks had allowed. I could see the exact quality of the decision forming in her expression. Not impulsive, not rushed. The specific resolution that comes after you have fully measured the cost and decided you can carry it. I'm not Barrett, I said. I don't have capital or connections or a decade on you. What I have is I noticed the bridge on day one and didn't ask because you told me not to yet. I learned how you took your espresso without being told. I can tell when you're tracing a surface because a problem is genuinely interesting versus when you're doing it because a problem feels impossible. And those are two completely different things that require two completely different responses from me. I have paid attention because you are someone worth paying attention to, and I am not going to pretend that is a professional observation and nothing else. She was watching me the way she watched schematics that required full understanding. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Not because of Barrett. Not because of a policy written by people who have probably never felt anything professionally inconvenient in their lives. I am standing here because I choose to be here, and you deserve someone who is here by choice and not by calculation. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything we had been precisely, carefully not saying across 3 weeks of late evenings, and half-sugar cubes and arguments about structural logic that were never entirely about structure. She reached out and placed her hand over mine on the drafting table, warm, steady, deliberate, the same hands that had designed 2 museum-collected buildings and a bridge that never got built and a clay model remade and remade for 15 years. I'm going to speak to the development board, she said, not about us, about Barrett's conduct. The way he has been using his investor position to apply personal pressure to this project's principal architect is a conflict of interest, and I have documentation and 2 board members who I am confident will see it exactly that way. And the firm's ethics concern, I asked. I'll address it in the same conversation, appropriately and transparently. Her voice was steady, certain. The existing policy conflates 2 entirely different situations, and I am not interested in allowing a document to be used as a blunt instrument against something it was never designed to cover. She straightened, squared her shoulders, and the strength in her posture looked nothing like the distance I'd spent 14 months observing from across a glass partition. It looked like someone who had finally decided to stop paying rent on a room she didn't need to live in anymore. Go home, Lane, she said quietly. Get some sleep, a pause, and on Monday bring me something worth arguing about. At the door, I stopped. The bridge, I said, the real one, from the sketchpad. I think you should build it. She looked at me, then at the clay model on the sill. It's a pedestrian footbridge. It wouldn't be the most significant thing this firm has ever done. No, I agreed. It would be the most honest. She didn't answer, but her hand moved, just slightly, to rest on the edge of the windowsill beside the clay model, like she was considering keeping it company for a while. The board conversation happened on a Thursday. I sat in the junior studio with a project file open on my screen and read nothing in it for 40 minutes. Dev sat nearby and did me the courtesy of not asking a single question. At 2:17, the executive floor conference room let out. I watched the partners return to their offices one by one. I watched the calibration in their expressions, the specific look of professional composure covering a significant internal recalibration. Barrett Voss's active involvement in project decisions was formally reallocated to a senior partner with no personal history with the firm's principals. His investor position was restructured to contractual distance from day-to-day operations, which was the professional language for, the leverage is gone. He transitioned off the project within 2 weeks. He left the building on a Wednesday afternoon, unhurried and unhesitating, the way people leave when they've already decided they weren't planning to stay anyway. I watched him cross the lobby from the mezzanine railing above. I felt something very clean settle into place. We didn't rush. I want to say that plainly, because the story of 2 people finding their way to each other is almost always told as though the moment of decision is also the moment of arrival. It isn't. The decision is just the moment you stop pretending you haven't already decided. There was a first coffee outside the building, a place 4 blocks over with exposed brick and a counter that looked like a repurposed workshop bench. She ordered espresso, half a cube. I ordered black with 1 full sugar. The person working the counter looked at us both and said something cheerful about opposites. Maren told them, evenly, that opposing elements placed correctly in relation to each other was architecture, not compromise, and that the distinction mattered. The counter person had no response. I was a little in love with her. There were difficult months. 50 people work at Alcott and Grayson, and not all of them were quiet about what they noticed. There were mornings where we sat across from each other in project reviews, perfectly composed, and the quality of that performance only existed because something real was underneath it. There were evenings where I lay awake, wondering whether I had added something to her life or only made it harder. I told her that once, late, over the phone, the city going quiet outside both our windows. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I sent the bridge drawings to the city planning office last Tuesday." I sat up, the ones from the sketchpad. Full construction documents. I've had a contact in the planning department for 6 years and I finally sent them. A pause. Preliminary approval came back this morning. I didn't say anything for a long time. "That might be the most significant thing you've ever told me," I finally managed. "It's a pedestrian footbridge." "You know it isn't." A pause, and then so quietly that I almost missed it against the background of the city at that hour. "No," she said, "I know it isn't." 1 year after the Meridian Awards dinner, the same event came back around. Same ballroom. Same chandelier light falling in the same angles on the same marble floor, the industry reassembling itself in black tie to decide who had mattered that year. I arrived early and stood near the windows overlooking the city, not the bar corner, not beside the exits, just the windows. I didn't count anything. I wasn't performing anything. I was just there. Maren appeared beside me. Deep blue this year, not the structured professional armor she'd worn 12 months before, something quieter, more specific to her. She stood close enough that our arms touched, and she looked at the room with that same calm, unhurried attention she brought to everything. But the quality of the stillness was different now. It was the stillness of someone who has nothing left to hold at a distance. "Anyone here on a dare tonight?" she said, eyes on the crowd. "I came because I wanted to," I said, still a novel sensation, honestly. She turned to look at me, and I saw it, the sequence I had spent a year learning to wait for. The eyes first, the change beginning there before her mouth had time to follow. Warm and real and entirely hers. "You're getting better at it," she said softly. I reached down and took her hand. She let me. Below the windows, the city went on the way cities do, ongoing, indifferent, full of its own ordinary urgencies and unremarkable miracles. Behind us, the room was loud with people performing their best professional selves. And we were 2 people standing at a window together, which it turned out required nothing else.